The fluorescent lights of the medical lab cast harsh shadows across my face as I rolled up my sleeve for what would become the most important blood test of my life. 3 weeks earlier, I had been my grandmother's golden child. Now, she could barely look at me without tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. All because of 5 words my cousin Derek whispered in her ear. Brandon's been using hard drugs. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from, and if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. What happened next would expose a web of lies so twisted that even I couldn't have imagined it. But the truth that the blood test revealed, it was darker than any of us expected. The whole mess started on a Tuesday in October when I decided to surprise my grandmother Eleanor with an unannounced visit. She lived in a modest ranch house on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio, the same house where she'd raised 4 children and watched 6 grandchildren grow up. At 78, she was still sharp as a tack, maintaining her garden with military precision and hosting Sunday dinners that brought the entire Patterson family together. I pulled into her driveway around 2 in the afternoon, noticing Derek's beat-up Honda Civic already parked there. My 25-year-old cousin had been staying with Grandma Eleanor on and off for the past 6 months, supposedly to help her with household tasks and keep her company. The arrangement had always struck me as odd, considering Derek had a history of financial troubles and hadn't exactly been the most reliable family member over the years. Walking up the familiar stone pathway, I could hear voices coming from the kitchen window. Derek's voice carried a tone I'd never heard from him before, urgent, almost conspiratorial. I knocked on the front door, but apparently they hadn't heard me over their conversation. "Grandma, I'm telling you, something's not right with Brandon," Derek was saying as I approached the side entrance. "I've seen the signs before. The way he's been acting lately, those phone calls he keeps taking outside during family dinners, and did you notice how thin he's gotten?" My blood ran cold. I stopped dead in my tracks, pressing myself against the brick wall beside the kitchen window. Through the gap in the curtains, I could see my grandmother sitting at her round wooden table, the same one where she'd helped me with homework countless times during my childhood. Her face wore an expression of deep concern that I'd rarely seen before. "But Brandon's always been such a good boy," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "He graduated from Ohio State with honors. He's got that nice job at the accounting firm downtown. Why would he get mixed up with drugs?" Derek leaned forward, placing his hand over hers in a gesture that seemed both comforting and manipulative. "Grandma, I love you like a brother, but addiction doesn't care about college degrees or good jobs. Some of the smartest people I know have fallen into that trap. And the pressure of those corporate jobs, it's exactly the kind of environment where people turn to stimulants to keep up." My stomach dropped. Derek was painting a picture that was completely fabricated, yet he was doing it with such conviction that even I might have believed him if I didn't know better. The truth was, I had been working longer hours lately. Our firm was handling a major merger that required extensive overtime. I'd lost some weight because I'd been too busy to eat regular meals and had been surviving on coffee and quick snacks. As for taking phone calls outside during family gatherings, I'd been dealing with a personal matter involving my ex-girlfriend Sarah, who'd been calling frequently about some belongings she left at my apartment. "What kind of signs are you talking about?" Grandma Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Derek pulled out his phone and began scrolling through what appeared to be a web page. "Look at this list I found online. Sudden weight loss, secretive behavior, frequent phone calls, changes in sleep patterns, financial problems. Brandon hits almost every single one of these warning signs." "Financial problems? But he just bought that new car," my grandmother protested weakly. "Exactly!" Derek's voice rose with false excitement. "Don't you think it's strange that he suddenly had enough money for a brand new Honda Accord? Where did that money really come from, Grandma? And why did he pay cash for it instead of financing like a normal person?" The irony of Derek questioning anyone's financial decisions wasn't lost on me. He'd borrowed money from family members multiple times over the past few years, always with promises to pay it back that never materialized. Meanwhile, I'd saved diligently for 3 years to buy my car outright, specifically to avoid monthly payments and interest charges. My grandmother stood up slowly and walked to the window, staring out at her carefully tended rose bushes. "I just can't believe it," she murmured. "His mother would be devastated. What am I supposed to do with this information?" "We need to help him," Derek said, his voice taking on a tone of fake sincerity that made my skin crawl. "But first, we need to be absolutely sure. I think we should stage an intervention, get the whole family involved. If Brandon's really using drugs, he's going to deny it at first. They always do. But if we confront him together with love and support, maybe we can get through to him." I'd heard enough. My hands were shaking with a combination of rage and disbelief as I quietly backed away from the window. Derek wasn't just spreading lies about me, he was orchestrating an elaborate campaign to destroy my reputation with our family. But why? What did he have to gain from this?
Instead of confronting them immediately, I decided to leave and think through my options. As I walked back to my car, my mind raced with possible explanations for Derek's behavior. Was this some kind of twisted jealousy? Had I done something to offend him without realizing it? Or was there something else going on that I wasn't seeing? That evening, I called my Aunt Patricia, Derek's mother, hoping to get some insight into his recent behavior. Patricia had always been the most level-headed member of our family, and she knew her son better than anyone. "Oh, Brandon, I'm so glad you called," she said, though her voice carried a heaviness that immediately put me on alert. "I've been worried sick about Derek lately. He's been acting so strange, making all these wild claims about people, creating drama where there shouldn't be any." "What kind of claims?" I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew the answer. Patricia sighed deeply. "He's been spreading rumors about various family members, saying they're involved in all sorts of questionable activities. Last month, he tried to convince your Uncle Robert that your cousin Jennifer was stealing from her employer. The month before that, he told your Aunt Susan that her husband was having an affair. None of it was true, of course, but it caused a lot of unnecessary heartache and tension." My heart sank as the pattern became clear. Derek wasn't specifically targeting me. He was systematically creating chaos within our family, and I was just his latest victim. But understanding his pattern didn't make the situation any less dangerous for me. "Patricia, I need to tell you something," I said, and proceeded to explain what I'd overheard at Grandma Eleanor's house that afternoon. The silence on the other end of the line stretched for so long that I wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Patricia spoke, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and anger. "I'm so sorry, Brandon. I've been trying to get Derek into therapy, but he refuses to go. He's been struggling with some personal issues lately, and I think he's lashing out at the family as a way to deflect attention from his own problems." "What kind of personal issues?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I really wanted to know the answer. Patricia hesitated for a moment before responding. "Promise me you won't share this with anyone else in the family, at least not yet. Derek's been having some serious financial troubles. He owes money to some very unsavory people, and I think he's desperate enough to do just about anything to get himself out of this mess." The pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. If Derek was in serious debt, particularly to dangerous people, he might be looking for ways to access family money or resources. By discrediting other family members, he could potentially position himself as the most trustworthy grandchild in Grandma Eleanor's eyes. And if he succeeded in convincing her that I was a drug addict, she might be more likely to turn to him for support and guidance, possibly even financial support. "How much money are we talking about?" I asked. "I'm not sure of the exact amount, but it's substantial, enough that he's been making some very poor decisions lately. I think he's desperate, Brandon, and desperate people sometimes do things they never thought they were capable of." After ending the call with Patricia, I spent the rest of the evening trying to figure out my next move. Simply denying Derek's accusations wouldn't be enough. He had already planted seeds of doubt in my grandmother's mind, and addicts were notorious for lying about their drug use. I needed concrete proof of my innocence, something that would be impossible to dispute or explain away. That's when I remembered something my friend Jake had mentioned a few weeks earlier. He worked as a lab technician at Columbus General Hospital and had told me about comprehensive drug screening tests that could detect virtually any substance in a person's system. These tests were far more extensive than the basic screenings most employers used, capable of identifying everything from common recreational drugs to exotic synthetic compounds. The next morning, I called Jake and explained my situation without going into too much detail about Derek's motivations. "You want to get tested voluntarily?" he asked, clearly confused. "Brandon, that's going to cost you several $100s, and insurance won't cover it since it's not medically necessary." "Money's not an issue," I replied. "I need the most comprehensive drug screen available, something that would detect any substance if it were in my system. Can you help me set that up?" Jake agreed to arrange the test for the following Monday, giving me a weekend to prepare for what would essentially be a fight for my reputation and my relationship with my family. But as I hung up the phone, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something important about Derek's plan. Little did I know that the blood test results would reveal something far more shocking than anyone could have imagined, something that would turn our entire understanding of the situation upside down and expose a truth that none of us were prepared to face. Over the weekend, I decided to do some investigating of my own. If Derek was really in financial trouble with dangerous people, there might be evidence of it somewhere. I started by checking.
A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Social media, looking through his recent posts and photos for any clues about his lifestyle or activities. What I found was troubling. Derek's Instagram showed a pattern of expensive purchases over the past few months. Designer clothes, expensive dinners at upscale restaurants, and photos of him at exclusive nightclubs downtown. For someone who was supposedly helping our elderly grandmother out of the goodness of his heart, he seemed to be living well beyond any reasonable means. I decided to drive by some of the locations where Derek had posted photos. The first was Meridian, an expensive steakhouse in the Short North District. I knew the prices there because I'd taken a client there for dinner once. Entrees started at $50, and wine bottles could easily run into the hundreds. While I was sitting in my car across the street, trying to figure out how Derek could afford to eat at places like this, my phone rang. It was my grandmother. "Brandon, honey, could you come over this evening? There's something important we need to discuss as a family." My stomach clenched. "What kind of discussion, Grandma?" "Well, Derek has shared some concerns with me, and I think it would be best if we could all sit down together and talk things through. Your Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan will be there too." So it was happening. Derek was moving forward with his intervention plan, probably confident that he'd laid enough groundwork to make his accusations stick. "Of course, Grandma. What time should I be there?" "How about 7 o'clock? I'll make some coffee and we can talk in the living room." After hanging up, I realized I needed to be strategic about this confrontation. Simply showing up and denying everything wouldn't work. Derek had clearly been preparing for this moment. I needed to turn the tables somehow, but I had to be careful not to come across as defensive or paranoid. I spent the afternoon researching Derek's recent activity more thoroughly. A quick search of public records revealed that he'd been served with an eviction notice from his apartment complex 3 months ago. Court documents showed he owed over $4,000 in back rent. There was also a small claims judgment against him from a former roommate for an additional $1,500. But the most interesting discovery came when I searched his name in connection with local news stories. 6 months ago, Derek had been questioned by police in connection with a series of credit card frauds targeting elderly residents in the area. No charges had been filed, but the timing coincided exactly when he'd started staying with our grandmother. Armed with this information, I arrived at Grandma Eleanor's house that evening feeling more prepared, but still nervous about the confrontation ahead. Uncle Robert's pickup truck and Aunt Susan's sedan were already in the driveway, along with Derek's Honda. The living room felt smaller than usual, with 5 adults crowded into it. Grandma Eleanor sat in her favorite armchair, looking older and more fragile than I had ever seen her. Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan occupied the couch,
both wearing expressions of concern mixed with skepticism. Derek sat in the chair closest to our grandmother, positioning himself as her protector and confidant. "Brandon, thank you for coming," Grandma Eleanor began, her voice shaking slightly. "Derek has brought some very serious concerns to my attention, and we all care about you too much to ignore them." Derek leaned forward, adopting what I recognized as his most sincere expression. "Brandon, before we start, I want you to know that this is coming from a place of love. We're not here to judge you or attack you. We're here because we're worried about you, and we want to help." The performance was masterful. If I didn't know better, I might have been impressed by his apparent concern for my well-being, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes, the careful way he was managing the room's emotional temperature. "What exactly?" I asked, keeping my voice calm and level. Uncle Robert cleared his throat. "Derek's told us about some changes he's noticed in your behavior lately. Weight loss, secretive phone calls, that expensive car you bought with cash. He's concerned that you might be involved with drugs. And he's shown us some very troubling evidence," Aunt Susan added, glancing nervously at Derek. "What evidence?" I asked, genuinely curious about what Derek had manufactured to support his claims. Derek pulled out his phone and began scrolling through photos. "I took these pictures at the last 2 family dinners. Look at how different you appear compared to photos from just a few months ago." He showed them a series of photos that had clearly been selected and possibly edited to make me look as gaunt and unhealthy as possible. In contrast, he then showed older photos where I appeared more robust and healthy. The comparison was striking, and I had to admit that if I didn't know the real reasons for my weight loss, I might have been concerned too. "And then there's this," Derek continued, pulling up what appeared to be a bank statement on his phone. "I happened to see this when Brandon left his phone unlocked at the last dinner. Look at these cash withdrawals. $300 here, $500 there, always in amounts under $600. My heart started racing as I realized what he was showing them. Those were real transactions from my account, but they weren't for drugs. They were cash withdrawals I'd been making to pay various contractors who were doing work on my apartment. My landlord was renovating several units in the building, and many of the workers preferred cash payments. But Derek wasn't finished. The most concerning thing, though, is this text message conversation I accidentally saw. He showed them a screenshot of text messages that appeared to be between me and someone named Tony discussing the usual amount and same place as last time. The messages were real, but completely out of context. Tony was a guy who sold organic vegetables at the farmer's market downtown. I'd been buying produce from him every Saturday morning for the past 2 months, and we'd established a routine where I'd text him my order and he'd have it ready for pickup. "These are completely taken out of context," I said. But I could see from the faces around the room that Derek's evidence was having the desired effect. "Brandon, addiction makes people very good at explaining away evidence," Derek said softly. "I've researched this extensively. Addicts always have perfectly reasonable explanations for everything, even when the pattern is obvious to everyone else." Grandma Eleanor was crying now, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Oh, Brandon, why didn't you come to us for help? We could have gotten you treatment before it got this bad." "Because I'm not using drugs," I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. "Derek is lying to you. I don't know why, but everything he's telling you is either fabricated or taken completely out of context." "See?" Derek said, turning to the others. "This is exactly the kind of denial and anger that addiction counselors warn family members about. Brandon, I know this is hard to hear, but getting defensive and trying to blame me isn't going to solve anything." Uncle Robert leaned back in his chair, studying both Derek and me carefully. "Brandon, would you be willing to take a drug test to prove your innocence?" "Absolutely," I replied immediately. "In fact, I've already arranged for one. I'm going to Columbus General on Monday morning for a comprehensive screening that will test for every possible substance. This seemed to catch Derek off guard. His confident expression faltered for just a moment before he recovered. That's great, Brandon. I hope you understand that we'll need to see the results directly from the lab, not just a summary that you provide. Of course, I agreed. Jake Morrison in the lab is handling it personally. You can call him directly to verify the results. The room fell silent for several long moments. Finally, Aunt Susan spoke up. Well, I suppose we'll know for sure on Monday. But Derek wasn't ready to let the matter drop. Even if the test comes back negative, that doesn't necessarily prove anything. Some drugs clear the system very quickly, and there are ways to mask the presence of substances if you know what you're doing. I realized that Derek was already preparing his fallback position. No matter what the test results showed, he was going to find a way to cast doubt on them. This wasn't just about drugs. This was about something much bigger. "Derek," I said, looking directly at him, "why are you so invested in proving that I'm using drugs? What do you get out of this?" His face flushed red. "I can't believe you'd suggest that I have some kind of ulterior motive. I'm trying to help you, Brandon. I'm trying to save your life." "Are you?" I asked, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're trying to destroy my relationship with our family. And I'm starting to wonder why. Uncle Robert's eyes narrowed as he looked back and forth between Derek and me. "What exactly are you suggesting, Brandon?" "I'm suggesting that maybe we should be asking Derek some questions for a change. Like how he can afford to eat at $50 a plate restaurants when he's supposedly unemployed, or why he was questioned by police about credit card fraud 6 months ago, or why he got evicted from his apartment for owing $4,000 in back rent." The color drained from Derek's face. "How do you know about any of that?" "Public records," I said simply. "It's all a matter of public record, Derek, just like the small claims judgment against you for $1,500. Grandma Eleanor looked confused and hurt. "Derek, is this true? You told me you were between jobs, but that you had some savings to tide you over."
Derek's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble. "Grandma, those are just temporary setbacks. Everyone goes through rough patches. That doesn't change the fact that Brandon needs help." "Actually, it does change things," Uncle Robert said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "It makes me wonder what else you haven't been honest about. And it makes me wonder," I continued, "whether this whole drug accusation is just a way to discredit me so that you can position yourself as Grandma's most trustworthy grandchild, maybe someone who deserves her help more than the rest of us." Derek stood up abruptly, his hands shaking with anger. "This is exactly what addicts do. They try to turn everyone against the people who are trying to help them. You're sick, Brandon, and you're manipulating this family just like drugs have taught you to manipulate everyone else." But his outburst only served to make him look more desperate and unstable. Aunt Susan was staring at him with growing suspicion, and Uncle Robert had pulled out his phone and appeared to be searching for something. "Derek," Grandma Eleanor said, quietly, "I think you need to tell me the truth about your financial situation. If you're in trouble, we can try to help you, but not if you're not honest with us." Derek looked around the room, seeing that his support was evaporating rapidly. His eyes filled with tears, whether genuine or calculated, I couldn't tell. "Fine," he said, his voice breaking. "Yes, I owe some money. Yes, I've been having problems. But that doesn't change the fact that Brandon is using drugs. Just because I have problems doesn't make his problems go away." "Who do you owe money to?" Uncle Robert asked, bluntly. Derek hesitated, and in that moment of silence, I realized that we were about to uncover something much more serious than family drama or even financial desperation. The fear in Derek's eyes was real, and it was deeper than anything I'd seen from him before. "People you don't want to meet," he finally whispered. The weight of Derek's words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. "People you don't want to meet." The phrase sent chills down my spine, but it also explained so much about his increasingly desperate behavior.
Uncle Robert set his phone down on the coffee table and leaned forward. Derek, who exactly are we talking about here? Derek slumped back into his chair, the fight seeming to drain out of him. It started small, just a few bets on college basketball games with this guy Marcus who hangs around O'Malley's bar downtown. I was having a good streak, winning more than I was losing, so I started betting bigger amounts. Aunt Susan's face went pale. Derek, please tell me you didn't get involved with illegal gambling. It's not like what you see in movies, Derek said defensively. Marcus runs a clean operation, professional. The problem is, my luck changed about 3 months ago, and I kept doubling down, trying to win back what I'd lost. Before I knew it, I was in for $23,000. The number hit the room like a physical blow. Grandma Eleanor gasped, her hand flying to her chest. $23,000 was more money than she'd ever had in savings at one time. Good Lord, Derek, Uncle Robert muttered. What were you thinking? I was thinking I could win it back. Derek's voice cracked with desperation. I had a system, a strategy. And he's given me until the end of this month to come up with the money. Or what? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Derek's laugh was bitter and hollow. Let's just say that Marcus's associates aren't known for their patience or their gentle collection methods. I've seen what happens to people who don't pay. The pieces were finally falling into place. Derek hadn't just been trying to discredit me out of jealousy or spite. He'd been setting up a con to extract money from our grandmother. If he could convince her that I was a drug addict spiraling out of control, she might turn to him as her most reliable grandson. She might even consider changing her will or giving him access to her finances to help him take care of the family. So your plan was to convince Grandma that I was on drugs so she'd trust you more? Maybe even give you money to help with family expenses or emergencies? Derek's silence was answer enough. You were going to steal from our grandmother to pay your gambling debts? Aunt Susan said, her voice filled with disgust. I wasn't going to steal anything, Derek protested. I was going to ask for a loan, a temporary loan that I would have paid back as soon as I got back on my feet. By continuing to gamble? Uncle Robert asked incredulously.
By getting a job, by finding other sources of income, by doing whatever it took to make things right. Derek's voice was becoming more frantic. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. These aren't the kind of people who accept payment plans or negotiate terms. They expect results, and they expect them fast. Grandma Eleanor had been quiet throughout this exchange, but now she stood up slowly and walked to the window overlooking her garden. When she turned back to face us, her expression was harder than I'd ever seen it. Derek, how long have you been living in my house under false pretenses? She asked. Grandma, I do want to help you. That part was always true. But the main reason was to get close enough to manipulate me into giving you money? Derek couldn't meet her eyes. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. I thought I could figure out another way to handle the debt. But time is running out, and I'm getting desperate. Desperate enough to destroy your cousin's reputation? She said. Desperate enough to lie to your own family and try to turn us against each other? Uncle Robert stood up and began pacing the small living room. Derek, do you realize what you've done? Even if we ignore the gambling and the lies, you've put this entire family at risk. If these people are as dangerous as you say they are, and if they know you're staying here, the implication hung in the air like a dark cloud. If Marcus and his associates were willing to use violence to collect debts, they wouldn't necessarily limit their attention to Derek alone. They might target family members, especially an elderly woman living alone. Have these people ever been to the house? I asked. Derek shook his head quickly. No, absolutely not. I've been very careful about that. They don't know about Grandma or any of you. Yet, Aunt Susan said grimly. But if you can't pay them, how long before they start looking into your background, your family connections? I've got 6 more days. If I can come up with the money by then, this whole thing goes away and nobody else ever has to worry about it. $23,000 in 6 days, Uncle Robert said. Derek, even if we all pooled our resources, I don't think we could come up with that kind of money on such short notice.
A terrible silence settled over the room as the reality of the situation sank in. Derek wasn't just in financial trouble. He was in physical danger, and his problems were potentially spilling over onto all of us. "What if we went to the police?" I suggested. Derek laughed bitterly. "And tell them what? That I voluntarily gambled away $23,000 and now I can't pay it back? Gambling debts aren't legally enforceable, Brandon. The police can't make Marcus forget that I owe him money, and they can't protect me 24 hours a day. But if these people are threatening violence, proving threats in the gambling world is nearly impossible. Marcus is too smart to put anything in writing, and any conversations are carefully worded to avoid direct threats. He just talks about consequences and disappointment and lets your imagination fill in the details." Uncle Robert sat back down, running his hands through his hair. "Derek, there's something I need to ask you, and I need you to be completely honest. Have you taken any money from Grandma already? Cash from her purse? Checks? Anything at all?" Derek's hesitation told us everything we needed to know before he even spoke. "How much?" Grandma Eleanor asked, her voice barely above a whisper. $2,000, Derek admitted. "I took it from the emergency fund you keep in your dresser drawer. But I was going to pay it back as soon as I figured out how to handle the Marcus situation. That's my grocery money for the next 4 months, she said, tears starting to flow again. "Derek, how could you?" "I was desperate, Grandma. I thought I could replace it before you noticed it was gone." "By stealing from Brandon's reputation?" I asked. "By turning the family against me so they'd trust you instead?" Derek nodded miserably. "I thought if I could discredit you, maybe I could convince Grandma to let me help manage her finances. Maybe she'd give me access to her accounts to pay bills and handle expenses. Then I could borrow what I needed temporarily and pay it back without anyone ever knowing." "Except I would have known," Grandma Eleanor said firmly. "Did you really think I wouldn't notice $23,000 missing from my accounts? I was hoping to work something out with Marcus, maybe negotiate a payment plan or find another way to handle it before I had to take that much." Aunt Susan shook her head in disbelief. "Derek, do you hear yourself? You were planning to steal from your elderly grandmother to pay gambling debts to dangerous criminals. And when that plan wasn't moving fast enough, you tried to destroy your cousin's reputation as a backup strategy." "I never meant for it to go this far," Derek said. "I thought the drug thing would just make everyone rally around me, trust me more. I didn't think it would turn into this big confrontation." "What did you think would happen when Brandon took a drug test and came back clean?" Uncle Robert asked. "I thought maybe he wouldn't take one. Or if he did, I could find ways to cast doubt on the results, make it seem like he was gaming the system somehow." Derek's voice was getting smaller and more defeated with each admission. Looking around the room, I could see that we were all struggling with the same impossible question. What do you do when someone you love has made choices that put everyone at risk? Monday was still 2 days away. 2 days until my blood test would prove my innocence once and for all. But now the blood test seemed like the least of our problems. Derek was facing a deadline that could result in serious injury or worse, and his desperation had already led him to steal from our grandmother and attempt to destroy my reputation. The question now was whether there was any way to help him out of this mess without enabling his destructive behavior or putting the rest of the family in danger. The weekend that followed was one of the longest of my life. Despite everything Derek had put me through, I couldn't stop thinking about the fear in his eyes when he described what happened to people who couldn't pay their gambling debts. Family was family, even when that family member had tried to destroy your reputation to save their own skin. Saturday morning, I drove to O'Malley's bar to see if I could learn more about Marcus and his operation. The place was exactly what I had expected. A dimly lit dive bar with peeling paint and the stale smell of cigarettes that no amount of cleaning could eliminate. Even at 11 in the morning, there were already a handful of regulars nursing their drinks and watching college football highlights on the ancient television above the bar. I ordered a beer I didn't want and struck up a conversation with the bartender, a weathered man in his 50s named Carl. After a few minutes of small talk about the local sports teams, I casually mentioned that I heard this was a good place to catch games and maybe make some friendly wagers. Carl's demeanor immediately became more guarded. "We don't know anything about gambling here," he said firmly. "This is just a bar where people come to drink and watch TV." But when I mentioned Derek's name and said I was his cousin, Carl's expression shifted slightly. "Derek Pattison. Yeah, I know Derek. Nice kid. But he's gotten himself into some trouble lately." "What kind of trouble?" I asked, playing dumb. Carl glanced around the nearly empty bar before leaning closer. "Look, I don't know you, and I don't know if you're a cop or what, but if you're really Derek's cousin, you need to get him away from Marcus. Far away." "Why? What's going on?" "Marcus isn't just some local bookie taking small bets on basketball games. He's connected to some serious people out of Cincinnati. The kind of people who don't just break legs when someone doesn't pay, they make people disappear entirely." My blood ran cold. Derek had made it sound like he was dealing with typical loan sharks who might rough him up a bit. But if Carl was telling the truth, Derek was in far more danger than any of us had realized. "How much time does he have?" I asked. Carl checked his watch. "Marcus was in here Thursday night asking about Derek. Said he had until Tuesday to make things right. That's 3 days from now." "And if he doesn't?" Carl just shook his head and walked away, busying himself with wiping down glasses that were already clean. I left O'Malley's with a sick feeling in my stomach. Derek wasn't just facing a beating. He might be facing something much worse. And despite everything he'd done to me, I couldn't just stand by and watch my cousin potentially get himself killed over gambling debts. That evening, I called Derek directly. He answered on the first ring, his voice tense and anxious. "Brandon, what do you want?" "I went to O'Malley's today," I said without preamble. "I talked to Carl, the bartender." Derek was quiet for a long moment. "What did he tell you?" "Marcus isn't just some local bookie. That he's connected to people from Cincinnati who make problems disappear permanently." "Carl talks too much," Derek muttered. "Derek, is that true? Are we talking about organized crime here?" Another long pause. "I don't know all the details of Marcus's business relationships. I just know that I owe him money and I need to pay it back." "This changes everything," I said. "If these are the kind of people Carl is describing, then going to the police might actually be an option. The FBI takes organized crime very seriously. And what happens to me when I testify against them? You think witness protection is going to keep me safe for the rest of my life? Brandon, you're talking about people who have resources and connections that go way beyond anything the local police can handle." I realized Derek was right. Even if law enforcement could build a case against Marcus and his associates, Derek would still be in danger as a potential witness. And there was no guarantee that any investigation would move fast enough to protect him in the immediate term. "What about the job Marcus offered you? The courier work? What about it? Have you seriously considered it as an option?" Derek sighed heavily. "It's the only option I have left, Brandon. I can't come up with $23,000 in 3 days, and I can't run away because they'll just track me down eventually. At least if I work for them, I'll be alive." "But for how long? Derek, once you start doing illegal work for these people, they own you. There's no working off the debt and walking away clean. They'll keep finding reasons to keep you on their payroll, and eventually you'll either get arrested or you'll end up dead anyway." "So what do you suggest?" Derek's voice was getting more agitated. "You got some brilliant plan that's gonna magically solve all my problems?" Actually, I was starting to form the outline of an idea, but it was risky and would require the cooperation of the entire family. "Maybe, but I need to talk to Uncle Robert and Aunt Susan first. Can you meet us at Grandma's house tomorrow morning?" "I'm not sure I can handle another family intervention right now." "This isn't an intervention. This is a planning session. We might actually have a way to get you out of this mess, but it's going to require everyone working together." Sunday morning, the same 5 family members gathered again in Grandma Eleanor's living room, but the atmosphere was completely different from our confrontation 2 days earlier. The anger and accusations had been replaced by a grim determination to find a solution to Derek's predicament. I've been thinking about this all weekend, and I think there might be a way to handle the Marcus situation without Derek having to become a criminal or put his life in immediate danger. Uncle Robert leaned forward. What did you have in mind? We pay the debt, I said simply. I've got about $12,000 in an old 401k from my previous job, he admitted, but there would be penalties for early withdrawal and taxes. I can contribute $8,000 from my savings, I continued. It's most of what I have, but I can rebuild it over time. Aunt Susan looked skeptical. That's $20,000. You're still $3,000 short. I have some jewelry that belonged to my late husband, Grandma Eleanor said quietly. My wedding ring, some earrings, a necklace that's been appraised for insurance purposes. Together, they're worth about $4,000. Grandma, no! Derek said, his voice breaking. I can't let you sell your wedding ring because of my mistakes. It's just jewelry, Derek. Your life is more important than sentimental objects. But even if we can come up with the money, Uncle Robert said, how do we know that paying Marcus will actually end this? What's to stop him from coming back in a few months asking for more? I had been thinking about that problem too. Because we're not just going to pay him, we're going to make it clear that Derek is leaving town immediately after the debt is settled. Derek, you've got that cousin in Seattle who's been trying to get you to move out there and work for his construction company, right? Derek nodded. Mitchell, he's offered me a job about 6 times over the past 2 years. Then that's where you go. You take the job, you leave Columbus, and you never come back. You start over completely, away from any temptation to gamble, and away from Marcus and his associates. And what if they follow me to Seattle? They won't, Uncle Robert said, with more confidence than I expected. These local operations don't typically chase people across the country for debts that have been paid in full. It's not cost-effective, and it draws unwanted attention from federal authorities. Aunt Susan was doing mental calculations. So Brandon contributes $8,000, Robert contributes $12,000 from his retirement account, Grandma sells her jewelry for $4,000, and Derek disappears to Seattle. What about the $2,000 he already stole from Grandma? I'll cover that separately, I said. Consider it a loan to Derek that he can pay back once he's established in Seattle. The room fell silent as everyone contemplated the plan. It wasn't perfect, and it would be financially painful for all of us, but it seemed like the only option that didn't involve Derek either becoming a criminal or risking his life. There's one more thing, I added. Derek, you have to agree to get help for your gambling addiction once you're in Seattle. This isn't just about paying off one debt. It's about making sure you never end up in this situation again. I'll do whatever it takes, Derek said. And for the first time since this whole mess started, he sounded genuinely sincere. And you have to stay away from Columbus for at least 2 years, Uncle Robert added. Maybe longer. We need to make sure that Marcus and his people forget you ever existed. Derek nodded. I understand. Grandma Eleanor stood up and walked to her bedroom, returning a few minutes later with a small jewelry box. She opened it and took out her wedding ring, turning it over in her hands as if she were seeing it for the first time. I wore this ring for 47 years, she said softly, but your grandfather would understand. He always said that family comes first, no matter what. The weight of what we were all sacrificing hit me then. Uncle Robert would lose thousands of dollars from his retirement savings and face tax penalties. Grandma Eleanor would lose irreplaceable sentimental items. I would give up most of my savings that I'd worked years to accumulate. And Derek would lose his home, his familiar surroundings, and any connection to the life he'd built in Columbus. But the alternative was potentially losing Derek entirely. When do we do this? Aunt Susan asked. Tomorrow. I get my blood test results Monday morning, which will officially clear my name of Derek's drug accusations. Then we approach Marcus Monday afternoon with the money and Derek's departure plan. Derek looked around the room at each of us. I don't know how to thank you for this. I know I don't deserve it after what I put you through, Brandon. You're right. You don't deserve it, but you're family, and that means something. Just don't ever put us in this position again. As we finalized the details of our plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something important. The plan seemed too simple, too straightforward for a situation that had become so complicated. But with Derek's deadline looming and no other realistic options,
Had to move forward and hope that our family solidarity would be enough to get him out of the mess he'd created. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonable chill that seemed to mirror the anxiety I felt as I drove to Columbus General Hospital.
Jake Morrison met me in the lobby at exactly 8 o'clock, looking more serious than I'd ever seen him. "Brandon, I need to ask you something before we proceed," he said as we walked toward the laboratory wing. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do the most comprehensive panel available? I'm talking about tests that will detect everything from common street drugs to prescription medications to exotic synthetic compounds. Some of these tests can reveal medical information that you might not want your family to know about." "Like what?" I asked, suddenly concerned that there might be complications I hadn't considered. "Well, for instance, if you're taking any prescription medications for depression, anxiety, ADHD, or other conditions, those will show up. Some supplements can trigger false positives for certain substances. Even some over-the-counter medications can create unusual results if taken in large quantities." I thought about it for a moment. The only medications I took regularly were a daily multivitamin and occasional ibuprofen for headaches. "I'm not taking anything that should cause problems. Let's do the full panel." The blood draw itself took less than 5 minutes, but Jake explained that the comprehensive analysis would take several hours to complete. "The basic drug screen will be ready by noon," he said, "but the exotic compound testing won't be finished until late this afternoon. I should have everything by 5. Can you call me as soon as you have the results? The whole family is waiting to hear, and we have some other urgent business to handle today." Jake nodded. "I'll call you personally as soon as I have everything." I spent the rest of the morning helping Uncle Robert with the early withdrawal paperwork for his 401k account. The process was more complicated than we'd expected, involving multiple forms and a waiting period that wouldn't be satisfied until after 2 p.m. Meanwhile, Aunt Susan had taken Grandma Eleanor to 3 different jewelry stores to get appraisals on her wedding ring and other pieces. The news wasn't encouraging. The total value was closer to $3,000 than the $4,000 we'd hoped for, leaving us about $1,000 short of Derek's total debt. At noon, Jake called with the preliminary results. "The basic drug screen is completely clean, Brandon. No trace of any common recreational drugs, no unusual prescription medications, nothing that would suggest drug use of any kind." I felt a massive wave of relief wash over me. "What about the comprehensive results?" "Those will take a few more hours, but honestly, if someone was using drugs regularly, they would have shown up in the basic screening. The comprehensive panel is mostly looking for very exotic substances that most people have never even heard of." I immediately called Derek to give him the good news. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with anxiety. "The basic drug screen came back completely clean. I'm officially vindicated." Instead of relief or happiness, Derek's response surprised me. That's great, Brandon. I'm glad you can clear your name." Something in his tone bothered me. "Derek, are you okay? You sound strange." "I'm fine, just nervous about this afternoon. Have you been able to get all the money together?" "We're close. We might be about 1,000 short, but we're hoping Marcus will accept that and Derek's immediate departure as sufficient." "Yeah, about that." Derek's voice trailed off. "About what?" "I talked to Marcus this morning. The situation has gotten more complicated." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean, more complicated?" "He's raised the amount. Says there's been interest accumulating while I've been stalling, plus some kind of administrative fee for the delay. The total is now $27,000. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. "Derek, that's $4,000 more than what we discussed. We can't come up with that kind of money." "I know. I tried to negotiate with him, but he says the number is final. So what are our options?" Derek was quiet for a long moment. "He's offered me a different deal. If I agree to work for him for 6 months, instead of just paying off the debt, he'll consider the matter settled." "Derek, we already discussed this. Once you start working for these people, there's no getting out." "But it might be my only choice now, unless you have another $4,000 lying around somewhere." I realized that Derek was right. We were trapped by circumstances beyond our control. Or were we? Something about this sudden increase in the debt amount seemed suspicious to me. "Derek, when exactly did you talk to Marcus this morning?" "Around 9. He called me right after I got your text about going to get your blood test. A terrible thought began forming in my mind. How did Marcus know that you were close to getting the money? Did you tell him about our family meeting? I I might have mentioned that my family was trying to help me figure something out. And now suddenly the debt has increased by exactly the amount that would make it impossible for us to pay it off. Derek was silent. Derek, do you think it's possible that Marcus never intended to let you pay off this debt? That maybe the plan all along was to force you into working for him? I don't know, Brandon. I'm not good at understanding how these people think. But I was starting to understand exactly how they thought. If Marcus was connected to organized crime from Cincinnati, as Carl the bartender had suggested, then Derek wasn't just a debtor to them. He was a potential recruit. A desperate young man with family connections in the area could be extremely valuable to a criminal organization. They could use him for courier work, money laundering, or any number of other activities that required someone with a clean record and local ties. The increased debt wasn't about interest or administrative fees. It was about ensuring that Derek would never be able to pay cash and walk away. Derek, I need you to think very carefully about this. Have you told Marcus anything specific about our family? About Grandma's house, Uncle Robert's job, anything like that? Just general stuff. Why? Because I think we've been approaching this all wrong. I don't think Marcus wants your money at all. I think he wants you. Before Derek could respond, my phone beeped with an incoming call. It was Jake from the hospital. Derek, I need to take this call. Don't make any decisions about Marcus until we talk again. I switched to the other line. Jake, please tell me you have good news. Brandon, I need you to come back to the hospital immediately. There's something very unusual about your blood test results that I need to discuss with you in person. Unusual how? I thought you said the basic screening was clean. The basic screening was clean, but the comprehensive panel found something that doesn't make sense. Can you be here in 30 minutes? Jake, just tell me what you found. I found traces of a synthetic compound that shouldn't exist in your system. Actually, it shouldn't exist anywhere. Brendan, someone has been giving you a drug that was developed exclusively for CIA psychological operations in the 1960s and was supposedly destroyed decades ago. The world seemed to tilt sideways. What are you talking about? The compound is called MK Delta 7. It was part of the MK Ultra program. It's designed to cause subtle behavioral changes and memory disruption without the subject being aware they've been drugged. Brandon, someone has been systematically poisoning you. I sat down heavily in my car, trying to process what Jake was telling me. How is that even possible? How would someone get access to a drug like that? That's what we need to figure out, and we need to figure it out fast. Because if someone's been giving this to you, they probably have a very specific reason for doing it. As I hung up the phone, the pieces of an entirely different puzzle began falling into place. Derek's accusations about my behavioral changes, the weight loss, the secretive phone calls, the way I'd been feeling slightly off balance for weeks without being able to identify why. Someone had been drugging me, but who and why? And then a truly terrifying thought occurred to me. What if Derek hadn't been acting alone? What if his accusations about my drug use weren't just a desperate attempt to manipulate our family, but what if they were part of a larger plan to make those accusations seem credible? I called Derek back immediately, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Then I called Uncle Robert, Aunt Susan, and finally Grandma Eleanor. None of them answered. Something was very wrong. I drove to Grandma Eleanor's house as fast as I dared, my mind racing with possibilities. If someone had been drugging me with a CIA-developed compound, they had access to resources and knowledge that went far beyond simple gambling debts and local criminals. When I pulled into Grandma's driveway, I noticed two unfamiliar cars parked on the street. Derek's Honda was there, along with Uncle Robert's truck. But the other vehicles suggested that our family meeting had gained some unexpected attendees. I approached the house cautiously, listening for voices from inside. What I heard made my blood run cold. "Mr. Patterson," an unfamiliar voice was saying, "your family's cooperation in this matter is appreciated, but I think there's been some misunderstanding about the nature of your grandson's debt." "We have the money," Uncle Robert's voice replied. $23,000, just like Derek said. "I'm afraid the amount has increased, as Derek mentioned. But more importantly, money was never really what we were after." "Then what do you want?" That was Aunt Susan's voice, high and strained with fear. "We want Derek to continue his current assignment. You see, he's been working for us for quite some time already. The gambling debt was simply a convenient cover story." Derek's voice, barely audible. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry for what, Derek?" Grandma Eleanor asked. "For everything. For the drugs I've been putting in Brandon's coffee every Sunday, for the lies about his behavior, for bringing these people into our lives." The world shifted completely. Derek hadn't just been trying to frame me for drug use. He'd been actually drugging me to create the behavioral changes that would make his accusations seem credible. And he wasn't working alone. I was standing outside my grandmother's house, listening to my family being threatened by what appeared to be professional criminals. And I had traces of a CIA mind control drug in my bloodstream. The situation had just become infinitely more dangerous than any of us had imagined. I crept around to the back of the house, my heart pounding so hard I was sure everyone inside could hear it. Through the kitchen window, I could see into the living room where my family was seated in the same arrangement as our previous meetings, but now there were two additional men standing near the doorway. One was a tall, thin man in an expensive suit who seemed to be doing most of the talking. The other was shorter and stockier, with the kind of build that suggested he was there for muscle rather than conversation. Neither of them looked like the local criminals I'd been imagining. These men had an air of professionalism that was somehow more terrifying than any street thug could have been. "Derek has been quite valuable to our organization," the tall man was saying. "His access to your family, particularly to Brandon, has allowed us to conduct a very important field test of certain pharmaceutical compounds." "You've been using my grandson as a human test subject?" Grandma Eleanor's voice shook with a combination of fear and outrage. "The compound Derek has been administering is completely safe, Mrs. Patterson. We simply needed to absorb its effects on someone with Brandon's psychological profile. Intelligent, stable, with strong family connections. The behavioral changes we documented will be very useful for future applications." Uncle Robert leaned forward aggressively. "What kind of future applications are you talking about?" "That's classified information, Mr. Patterson. What's important for you to understand is that Derek's work with us isn't finished. We need him to continue his current assignment for at least another 6 months." "And if we refuse?" Aunt Susan asked. The shorter man spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a subtle accent I couldn't quite place. "Refusal would be unfortunate for everyone involved. Derek understands the consequences of discontinuing his cooperation." Derek, who had been sitting silently with his head in his hands, finally looked up. "They have photos," he said miserably. "Photos of me putting the drug in Brandon's coffee. They have recordings of our conversations. If I don't continue working for them, they'll send everything to the police and make it look like I was trying to poison Brandon on my own." "But you were poisoning Brandon," Uncle Robert said angrily. "Not by choice," Derek's voice cracked. "They approached me 6 months ago when I was at my lowest point. I'd lost my job, I was behind on rent, I was drinking too much. They offered to solve all my problems in exchange for small favors." The tall man smiled coldly. "Derek was quite enthusiastic about our arrangement once he understood the benefits. The gambling debt he described to you is entirely fictional. We've been providing him with money, housing, and other necessities in exchange for his services." I felt sick as the full scope of the deception became clear. Derek hadn't gotten into trouble with local criminals. He'd been recruited by what appeared to be some kind of intelligence operation?
Or private security firm.
The gambling story, the family intervention, even his apparent desperation had all been carefully orchestrated theater. "What exactly have you been testing?" Grandma Eleanor asked. "MK Delta 7 is designed to create subtle personality changes and memory disruption," the tall man explained, with the casual tone of someone discussing the weather. "We needed to verify that the compound could be administered repeatedly without detection and that the behavioral changes would be attributed to other causes by the subject's family and colleagues." The weight loss, the secretive phone calls, the way Brandon's been acting differently at family dinners, Aunt Susan said, putting the pieces together. "You were documenting all of that?" Precisely. Derek's reports on Brandon's behavioral changes, combined with the family's reactions to those changes, have provided us with valuable data about the compound's effectiveness. Derek looked around the room at his family members, tears streaming down his face. "I never wanted any of this to happen. They said it was harmless, that Brandon would never know, that it would just be temporary." "Nothing is ever temporary with people like us, Derek," the tall man said. "You should have understood that from the beginning." I realized I needed to call for help, but I also knew that these men wouldn't hesitate to hurt my family if they felt threatened. I carefully pulled out my phone and texted Jake at the hospital. "Emergency. Call the FBI. Send them to 1247 Maple Street immediately. Lives in danger." Then I texted the same message to my friend Marcus, who worked as a dispatcher for the Columbus Police Department. I had no idea if either message would result in actual help arriving, but it was the only thing I could think of. "There's just one problem with your plan," Uncle Robert was saying inside. "Brandon took a comprehensive drug test this morning. When those results come back, everyone's gonna know he's been drugged." The tall man's expression didn't change. "Actually, Mr. Patterson, that's not a problem at all. It's the next phase of our operation." "What do you mean?" Aunt Susan asked. "Brandon's blood test results will show traces of MK Delta 7, which will be quite shocking to the medical community. A compound that's supposed to have been destroyed decades ago suddenly appearing in the bloodstream of a random civilian? It will raise many questions about how such a thing could be possible." Derek looked up sharply. "You said the compound was undetectable." "I said it was undetectable by standard drug screening methods. We never said anything about comprehensive laboratory analysis using advanced spectrometry equipment." The tall man's smile was predatory. "Brandon's decision to get such an extensive test was actually quite helpful to our timeline." "You wanted him to find the drug in his system," Grandma Eleanor said, understanding dawning in her voice. "Brandon's blood test results will trigger an immediate federal investigation. The FBI, CIA, and several other agencies will become very interested in how a civilian gained access to a classified compound. Brandon will be detained for questioning, possibly for weeks or months." I felt the blood drain from my face as I realized what they were planning. The drug test that was supposed to clear my name was actually part of an elaborate setup to make me look like some kind of security threat. During that investigation, the tall man continued as if there had been no interruption, "Brandon's detention and investigation will provide the perfect cover for Derek to disappear from Columbus entirely. While the authorities are focused on Brandon, Derek will be relocated to a new city where he can continue his work for us without any family interference." "Work doing what?" Derek asked. "We have other subjects who need monitoring, other compounds that require testing. Your success with Brandon has demonstrated that you have the skills and psychological flexibility we need for long-term operations."
I was running out of time. These people had planned everything too carefully to be stopped by standard law enforcement response. Even if the FBI arrived, they'd probably find a way to spin the situation to make my family look like the criminals. But there was one thing they hadn't accounted for. I knew about the MK Delta 7 before they expected me to know about it. I quietly made my way back to my car and retrieved a digital voice recorder I kept in the glove compartment for work meetings. Then I crept back to the window and held the device as close as possible to record the conversation inside. "There's something I don't understand," Uncle Robert was saying. "If this compound is so valuable for your research, why risk exposing it by having Brandon take a comprehensive drug test?" "Because the research phase is complete," the tall man replied.
We now need to move into the operational phase, which requires field testing under real-world conditions. Brandon's investigation will provide us with valuable intelligence about how federal agencies respond to the discovery of classified compounds in civilian populations. You're going to let them torture my grandson to see how the government reacts? Grandma Eleanor's voice was filled with horror. Brandon won't be tortured, Mrs. Patterson. He'll simply be questioned extensively about his activities, his contacts, his political affiliations. The process will be uncomfortable, but it will provide us with crucial information about federal interrogation protocols and information-gathering techniques. I had heard enough to understand that these people were planning to use me as an unwitting intelligence asset, sacrificing my freedom and possibly my life to gather information about federal law enforcement capabilities. But I had also heard enough to potentially identify them and their organization. The tall man was checking his watch. Derek, it's time for us to leave. Your family understands the situation now, and they know what will happen if they attempt to interfere with our operations. What about the money? Derek asked. The $23,000 they raised to pay off my gambling debt. Keep it, the tall man said dismissively. Consider it compensation for your family's cooperation and silence. As I heard footsteps moving toward the front door, I realized this might be my only chance to get clear photos of the two men. I positioned myself near the corner of the house where I could see the front walkway. The tall man emerged first, followed by Derek and then the shorter man. In the daylight, I could see that the tall man had distinctive facial scars and wore a ring with some kind of organizational insignia. The shorter man had a tattoo visible on his neck that looked military in nature. I managed to take several photos with my phone before they reached their cars. As they drove away, Derek looked back at the house with an expression of absolute despair. I waited another 10 minutes before going inside to make sure they were really gone. When I finally entered through the back door, I found my family sitting in stunned silence. Brandon! Grandma Eleanor stood up and rushed to hug me. Thank God you weren't here when they arrived. I was here, I said grimly. I heard everything. I showed them the voice recorder and explained how I documented the entire conversation. We have evidence now. Real evidence of what they've been doing. But will anyone believe us? Aunt Susan asked. These people seem to have thought of everything. Uncle Robert was staring at the door where the men had exited. Brandon, there's something else you need to know. After they explained that plan, Derek told us something that changes everything. What? The tall man isn't just some private contractor or intelligence operative. Derek recognized his voice from phone calls he'd overheard. The man works for the federal government. This isn't a rogue operation. This is an official program. I felt the world shift again. We weren't dealing with criminals or private military contractors. We were up against the United States government itself. The next 18 hours were the most intense of my life. Uncle Robert's business contact, a man named Thompson, who ran a government consulting firm, proved to be our lifeline. When Robert explained our situation in carefully vague terms, Thompson immediately understood the gravity of what we were dealing with. You need to understand, Thompson told us during a late-night conference call, what you're describing sounds like a black-budget operation. These programs exist in legal limbo, authorized by national security directives that most of Congress never sees. Senator Caldwell has been trying to shine light on exactly these kinds of operations for years. Derek spent the entire night compiling everything he knew about the Department of Advanced Behavioral Studies. Names, locations, operational protocols, budget codes, even photographs of personnel he'd met during his 6 months of involvement. The scope of the program was staggering. Derek's operation with our family was just one of dozens happening simultaneously across the country. They're not just testing compounds, Derek explained as he organized his documentation. They're studying how to manipulate entire family units, how to create social instability, how to identify and recruit assets from ordinary civilian populations. It's like they're treating American citizens as enemy combatants in some kind of psychological warfare experiment. By dawn Tuesday morning, we had assembled a comprehensive package of evidence. Audio recordings, photographs, documentation, Derek's detailed timeline of activities, even the business card Dr. Mitchell had given him. Thompson arranged for everything to be delivered directly to Senator Caldwell's chief of staff through secure channels. The hardest part was waiting. Derek was supposed to report for relocation at 9 a.m., which meant we had to maintain the pretense that everything was normal until we heard back from Senator Caldwell's office. Derek went to the designated meeting point, a hotel near the airport, while the rest of us waited anxiously at Grandma Eleanor's house. At 11:30 a.m., Thompson called with news that would change everything. "Senator Caldwell's office has reviewed your materials," he said, his voice tight with excitement. "She's calling an emergency closed session of the Intelligence Subcommittee for this afternoon. More importantly, she's issued immediate protective custody orders for your entire family." "What does that mean?" I asked. "It means federal marshals are being dispatched to your location right now. You'll be placed in secure housing until the congressional investigation is complete. And Derek is being extracted from his current situation by a joint FBI-Senate security team." Within an hour, our quiet neighborhood was swarming with federal agents. Not the sinister operatives we'd been dealing with, but legitimate FBI agents and federal marshals who treated us like victims rather than test subjects. They explained that Senator Caldwell had been investigating rumors about unauthorized domestic research programs for months, and our evidence provided the breakthrough she needed. The congressional hearing that followed was conducted in closed session, but Thompson kept us informed of the developments. Dr. James Mitchell and his entire organization were suspended pending a full investigation. The Department of Advanced Behavioral Studies was revealed to be an unauthorized offshoot of legitimate CIA research programs operating without proper oversight or legal authority. Derek's testimony proved to be the key to everything. His detailed knowledge of the program's operations, combined with his documentation of activities involving our family, provided congressional investigators with enough evidence to shut down not just our local operation, but the entire network of similar programs across the country. The personal cost was significant. Derek entered witness protection and was relocated to an undisclosed location where he began intensive therapy to deal with the psychological manipulation he had endured. The rest of us underwent extensive medical testing to determine the long-term effects of our exposure to various experimental compounds and techniques. For me, the MK Delta 7 in my system gradually cleared over several weeks, and I slowly began to feel like myself again. The weight loss stabilized, the memory issues resolved, and the subtle anxiety that had been plaguing me for months finally disappeared. But the knowledge of what had been done to me, to all of us, left scars that would take much longer to heal. The most difficult part was rebuilding trust within our family. Even though we all understood that Derek had been coerced and manipulated, the fact remained that he had spent months systematically betraying us. Forgiveness came slowly, through family therapy sessions and countless difficult conversations about what we'd all been through. Grandma Eleanor, remarkably, was the first to fully forgive Derek. She said during one of our therapy sessions, "He was just a boy caught up in something too big for him to understand. They turned him into a weapon against his own family, but underneath it all, he was still our Derek." 6 months later, Senator Caldwell's investigation resulted in sweeping reforms to oversight of classified research programs. New laws were passed requiring congressional approval for any research involving unwitting civilian subjects. Dr. James Mitchell and his entire organization were charged with various federal crimes, from unlawful human experimentation to conspiracy to violate civil rights. But perhaps the most important outcome was personal. Our family, which had come so close to being completely destroyed by government manipulation, emerged stronger and more united than we'd ever been. We'd been through something that tested every bond between us, and we'd survived it together.
Derek eventually left witness protection and rejoined our family. He'd completed extensive therapy and was working as an advocate for research ethics, using his experience to help prevent other families from going through what we had endured. The gambling addiction that had made him vulnerable to recruitment in the first place was addressed through ongoing treatment and support. The lawsuit we filed against the federal government resulted in a substantial settlement, but more importantly, it established legal precedents that would protect other families from similar exploitation. Our story became part of the congressional record, a permanent reminder of what could happen when government power operated without proper oversight.
Looking back now, I realize that the blood test that was supposed to simply clear my name of Derek's drug accusations ended up exposing a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of government. What started as a family crisis over false accusations became a fight for the fundamental rights of American citizens to be protected from their own government's abuse of power. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Derek's desperate lies about my drug use, intended to manipulate our family for his handler's benefit, ultimately led to the exposure and destruction of the very program that had recruited him. In trying to frame me as a drug addict, he'd inadvertently created the circumstances that would free all of us from a much more sinister form of victimization. Today, our family dinners are different than they used to be. There is a deeper appreciation for the simple act of being together, knowing that we came so close to losing each other entirely. We're more protective of our privacy, more skeptical of unexpected changes in behavior or routine, and more aware of how vulnerable ordinary families can be to extraordinary manipulation. But we're also closer than we've ever been. Surviving something like this, being targeted, manipulated, and nearly destroyed by forces beyond our control, creates bonds that can't be broken by ordinary family disagreements or misunderstandings. Derek still struggles with guilt over what he put us through, but he's channeled that guilt into meaningful work protecting other families. His advocacy has helped identify and shut down 2 other unauthorized research programs, and his testimony has been instrumental in strengthening legal protections for research subjects. The blood test results that shocked everyone weren't the results themselves. They were what those results revealed about the world we're really living in. A world where our own government was willing to treat innocent families as laboratory animals, where the people sworn to protect us were the ones we most needed protection from. But they also revealed something else, that when families stand together, when they refuse to be divided by manipulation and lies, they can overcome even the most powerful forces arrayed against them. Our love for each other, tested by months of systematic psychological warfare, proved to be stronger than any compound they could synthesize in their laboratories. That's the real shock that the blood test results revealed. Not that we'd been victimized, but that we'd survived together. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.